Welcome to the FCTV debate among the candidates running for state senate in the Plymouth Barnstable district. That includes the towns of Bourne, Falmouth, and Sandwich in Barnstable County, and Kingston, Pembroke, and Plymouth in Plymouth County. Falmouth Community Television is nonpartisan and does not endorse specific candidates. The forum is produced by Falmouth Community Television as a public service, and all candidates have been invited to participate. Our candidates on the Democratic primary is Becky Coletta, John Mahoney, Thomas Moakley, Susan Moran, and Stephen Michael Palmer. Welcome. Happy to have all of you here.
Thank you.
Our format, up to 1 minute for responses to the questions. We'll alternate who goes first, and we'll have 2 minutes at the end for closing comments. So we're going to get right into it, and Becky Coletta, we'll start with you. What experience do you bring to the table that makes you the best candidate for the job?
So I think what makes me the best candidate for the job is my diversity of experience. I'm a lawyer. I'm a social worker. I'm a realtor. I also have spent a couple years on a board of selectmen in one of our local towns, and I also have been on the Pembroke Planning Board for the last 5.5 years, where we've passed some substantial revisions to our bylaws. And I also have worked on a lot of political campaigns and worked with a lot of people involved in government in Plymouth County particularly. And and I have had a perspective of watching politics my entire life. I first joined the Young Democrats when I was in college back in the 1980s.
Thank you. John Mahoney.
So I have a pretty diverse background, and I got involved in public service well over 30 years ago. Growing up in the town of Pembroke, I graduated from Silver Lake Regional High School, Pembroke campus in 1985. I'm also an Eagle Scout. Mr. Moakley and myself are Eagle Scouts. I ran for select board in Pembroke in 1988 when I was 20. I lost, but I never lost the passion for public service. Upon moving to Plymouth in the late 90s, I got involved in town meeting. I was put on the Finance and Advisory Board, and for the last 12 years, I've been a member of the Plymouth Select Board, overseeing and participating in crucial decisions that impact a $250 million budget. I'm a member of NDCAP, the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel, ensuring the safe decommissioning of the Pilgrim Power Station. I'm a graduate of Bridgewater State University. I have a degree in business management. And last but not least, certainly, is I'm also a member of Local 4. I work in the trades.
Thank you. Thomas Moakley, same question.
Many people in Falmouth know that I am no stranger to being the youngest person in the room. I'm 25 years old, but I'm a quick study, and I'm eager to help my community that has given me so much over the course of my entire life. And I am a graduate of Georgetown University. I've been putting myself through the evening program at Suffolk Law School while working full-time for the District Attorney of Suffolk County. I am also an Eagle Scout, as John mentioned. And I'm eager to get to work because the issues that are most important to our community are disproportionately affecting young people, like climate change and the opioid epidemic, and it's time we tackled them in an earnest, collaborative way.
Thank you. Susan Moran.
Thanks. I am looking forward to earning your vote as your senator because I'm in the middle of working on a lot of regional projects, whether it's clean water, green energy, the blue economy. I currently chair economic development for Barnstable County. I'm also the deputy speaker for the regional government of Barnstable County. I serve on the Falmouth Select Board. I'm also a lawyer. I've done court work for a long time. I currently do some solar development, and I was on the board of economic development for Falmouth when we did solar over the landfill, which we just received a report to the Board of Selectmen that shows that project itself put about $1 million into the town's coffers. And that's the kind of economic development that spurs growth, it makes jobs, and it lowers taxes for the region. And that's why I want to be your senator.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer.
Good day. My name's Stephen Michael Palmer, running for this seat a second time. Last time I ran, I got 5,000 votes, over 5,000 votes. I'm looking for those votes back. I'm currently a Commissioner of the Redevelopment Authority in the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts. I was a former town meeting member, and you can't do two positions in the town, so I had to leave town meeting. In the town of Braintree, Massachusetts, at 17 and a half, I was elected as a town meeting member in the town. My brother was Down syndrome. We left the city of Boston because they didn't have any programs in Boston for Down syndrome, and Braintree had started a brand new high school. In order to have that high school, they had to have a program for my brother Terrence, who was Down syndrome, and that's why we moved there. I'm more of a community activist in the town. I'm not going to give you some, high answers or.
Okay. Thank you. Climate change is on the mind of many voters, and I have two questions on that issue. And the first question, John Mahoney, we'll start with you this time. Do you support climate mitigation efforts like carbon pricing?
Is there a second question?
We're going to do the first question first and then the second question.
Okay, and these are all 1 minute, correct?
Yes.
I do. I give Beacon Hill and the administration, obviously the House, the governor, and the Senate credit for hopefully taking a holistic look at this, a large, long-term view of this. We have a situation that we're facing. We have to have a pretty sophisticated investment in what we're trying to do as far as mitigating this issue. It's here, it's not going anywhere, and the sooner we deal with it proactively, certainly the TCI initiative I support. Are there some variables that have to be worked out? Absolutely. But we've got to do something. Obviously, it's across both aisles, it's collaborative, and the notion that we're tying in another 12 states and trying to do something for the entire Northeast region, I think is commendable, and it needs to get done.
Thank you. Thomas Moakley?
Yes, I support carbon pricing. I think especially effective would be something like a revenue-neutral carbon tax, which is something that British Columbia has implemented, and they've already reduced their emissions by 15% just since it was implemented. I also think we need to bring something like a Massachusetts Green New Deal, because this is something that's disproportionately affecting Cape Cod already. The Boston Globe ran a fantastic feature called On the Edge of a Warming World, talking about how Cape Cod is already facing this issue in a very real way. And something like a Massachusetts Green New Deal would bring really quality, sustainable jobs to the area, as well as climate resilient infrastructure.
Thank you. Susan?
Carbon pricing, yes, I'm in favor. I think we have to take bold steps to address our climate emergency, but I think we have to do it in a way that carefully looks at the way it affects commuters, the way it affects small businesses, and we have to take account for that. For example, at the debate last evening, one of the folks in the audience mentioned me, what about electric cars? Is there a way we can look at, for example, during inspection times, look at mileage and make the carbon pricing programs also work for folks who want to stand out and get the electric cars and be the first. And I thought that was a great idea. That's the kind of legislation I want to bring to the Senate.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer?
I am for the tax, but I just hope the money doesn't go to different programs. I hope it stays in the greenhouse effect where, it helps the environment. A lot of times when you do tax something like this, it follows the tax and spend of Beacon Hill where, state legislators are making $18 million more in the pay raises, and everybody seems not to put the money where it should be into the environment to protect our environment. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky?
Yes, I'm also in support of the carbon pricing. I think we have to look at it, though, in terms of both how we're going to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, how we're going to discourage use of fossil fuels, but it has to be done in conjunction with making sure that it doesn't inequitably affect people who are lower income and need to travel to jobs. And we have to do it in conjunction with improving our public transportation so that people have options if they can't afford an electric car or can't afford other fossil fuel automobiles. If they need to be able to have public transportation. In this region in particular, we really are underserved by public transportation, and that would be a main focus of mine.
Thank you. Thomas Moakley, we start with you this time. What kinds of adaptations should we be considering as we look at coastal resiliency?
There's a lot of things that we need to be doing, including elevating the scientists and experts we have in our own region. Woods Hole is rich with experts who know exactly what is happening, why it's happening, and who can guide us as to policies of what is going to work and what is not going to work. And especially when we're talking about infrastructure and the renovation of existing infrastructure, we need to be planning 50 or even 100 years ahead. And that's a community effort, because if the town is making one decision about, say, the height of the bridge or the apparatus on the bridge in Woods Hole, but then Huey is making a different decision about how high they're going to rebuild their new dock for the Neil Armstrong, then there's no coordination there, and one or the other is going to ultimately lose. So it needs to be a community effort to make sure that new infrastructure is taking these things into consideration.
Thank you. Susan Moran?
So as chair of the Falmouth Board of Selectmen, we started a climate action committee so that while we were planning for town meeting on how to spend funds, for example, to repair beaches or roadways that had been storm damaged, we could, on a parallel course, look at 30 to 50 years ahead and use the scientific organizations that we are rich in the Plymouth Barnstable district, and have that information so that we know and we can publicize and have conversations with folks who are in our coastal communities. 5 out of the 6 towns are coastal communities in this district. And if we've got to essentially plan for the next couple of years, and at the same time not ignore planning for the next 20 or 30 years. And that's a model that's being taken up by more and more towns in this community.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer.
You know, I've said this before, I'm gonna say it again, you can't fight Mother Nature. You know, Mother Nature's here, and to fight it is almost impossible. I feel that town of Falmouth, when the beach erosion comes, they get the front loaders out and they replace it, and I'll make sure that the money is there from the state to have that done. Other than that, you know, we can talk and we can have meetings and everything, but you can't fight Mother Nature. It's coming, and global warming is here.
Thank you. Becky?
So part of it is we need to acknowledge the fact that no matter what we do in terms of no fossil fuel, there will be some sea level rise. And that sea level rise is fairly immediate. Like by 2050, we'll have significant 1 to 2 foot sea level rise. So we have to start to adapt to that in our coastline, in our infrastructure. I've worked for a long time. I worked with a coastal engineering firm that was based in Louisiana that also did work in Texas, New York, and Florida, and did a lot of post-Hurricane Sandy work in New York on Long Island. And the storms that are coming with global warming are going to get worse. We have to make this a priority. It's not something we can look at just around the edges. We need to really look very boldly at how we're going to address our coastline and how we're going to protect ourselves from what is changing out there.
Thank you. John?
About 20 years ago, the town of Plymouth had an employee that filled out paperwork for the permitting, design, and engineering of the removal of a dam on Town Brook. So in 2002, the town of Plymouth removed the first dam on the coast in Massachusetts history. And since then, we've removed 4 more on Town Brook, and we're the leader in New England with respect, if not the northeastern United States, with respect to dam removal projects. You talk about more frequent northeasters, storm surge. We're mitigating that by removing antiquated infrastructure along the coast and allowing the water to have more room to move, as far as, you know, instead of just flooding out and damaging more property in the downtown area. We've been proactive in the last decade for removing homes. We've engaged with private property owners. We've purchased multiple homes on Whitehorse Beach in Plymouth. We've removed them from the beach. We've removed a couple of houses from a barrier beach, Long Beach in Plymouth, and we've been proactive in doing things differently. We are in Massachusetts, we're the host community, the largest 2 wetlands restoration projects in Massachusetts. We continue to be.
Thank you. Susan Moran,
you should have another sign that gives us 15 seconds notice before that sign goes up.
Susan Moran, we'll start with you this time. Do you support adding nip bottles to the state bottle bill or a nip bottle ban?
I absolutely do. In fact, I was testifying at the State House several weeks ago, and the Refuge Committee from Falmouth had brought legislation that I supported along with Representative Peake, which discussed the fact that there has to be some sort of payment, whether the amount should be large or not is still in debate. But Falmouth folks have picked up bags and bags of nips on the street. And the debate right now is whether it should be a regional initiative as opposed to a town initiative, because there is concern that if you can't, for example, buy nips in Bourne, folks will just go to Sandwich. So that's why regional planning is really important, and my regional experience lends to my ability to go to the State House and solve these problems.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer.
I've solved the problem in my town because I have picked up thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of trash. These nips are everywhere. They're on the roadside of Bourne. They're on the roadsides of State Road. And I have diligently, my bags are filled like that. John will contest that. I have been out there. Of course they should be deposited. Of course they should be returned and have a redeposit label on them. I don't know why they let them in the market to begin with. The fact is, I have been diligently cleaning it up every Saturday, filling the bags in Plymouth, and I feel that going to the State House, maybe we should put a dime on it. I think it's worth more than a dime than a nickel.
Thank you. Becky Coletta.
I think the nip bottles are a piece of a bigger problem. It's not just about recycling or return fees. It's about addiction. It's about the fact that a lot of times the nips are left on the side of the road because people are drinking them and driving, and they don't want an open container in their car. And we have to get serious about this. So I grew up in a family with a father who's an alcoholic. It's largely why I went back to Bridgewater State and got my master's in social work in 2006. We have a problem in our country where part of the declining life expectancy is from cirrhosis, in addition to overdoses and suicides. Just putting a return fee on the nips, yes, I've picked up my share of nips, and it's disgusting and it's horrible, but I think the bigger issue is getting at why people are drinking nips and throwing them on the side of the road, and that requires a much more serious response to our addiction issues.
Thank you. John Mahoney.
Well, as a society, the United States, we don't do a few things well, and that's one of those is taking care of our infrastructure. And another one is trash and recycling. And you saw what happened a year or two ago with respect to China, with no longer allowing in our trash or our recycling being outshipped from the United States because we don't want to deal with it. We need to create a domestic recycling market, and that needs to be done. Whether that's the state of Massachusetts does that alone, or whether, God willing, the current administration does that for the entire country. We need to do something and do a better job as far as trash goes, because it doesn't matter with respect to, there are nickel deposits on the cans, and the highways and roads of our society are littered with debris, no pun intended. I would certainly support a deposit on the nips if I had a certain amount of data that showed that it would make a difference, and right now I'm not inclined to begin to believe that.
Thank you. Thomas Moakley.
I would support a nip ban, as not only is it ecologically sound, but as Becky said, it also encourages drunk driving, and this is a matter of addiction. Last year in the United States, for every 5 people who died of an opioid overdose, 3 people died of an overdose from a different drug, 5 people died from suicide, and 9 people died from alcohol-related diseases. I mean, another thing we can do on this important issue is start regulating sober homes, the vast majority of which in Massachusetts go unregulated. We need to make sure that these facilities are doing what they were intended to do, so you don't walk past on recycling day and see the bin full of nips and empty bottles.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer, we start with you this time. There's agreement that both the Bourne and Sagamore bridges should be replaced. An area we do not have consensus is whether or not there should be tolls to help pay for them. Would you support tolls? Why or why not?
No, I think we've had enough of tolls in Massachusetts. I feel that it's open to the public. It's on a beautiful stretch of land, and it's the people's land as well as the taxpayers. And the fact is that tolls would just clog up more traffic. I don't believe it. I think the state should foot the bill on it. If they want to build a new one, let them come up with the money. I was happy with Romney, the way he did that turnaround. They call them turnarounds in South, we call them rotaries, but the fact is it helped the traffic. I think tolls would be devastating. I don't think it would stop people from coming here.
Thank you. Becky Coletta.
So I think with tolls, we have to look more on a statewide level. I don't think the tolls should be there simply to pay for these bridges. When I think of tolls and I think of congestion pricing, to me it's part of a plan of how are we going to change a very automobile-dependent economy. How are we going to get cars off the road? I don't think tolls that somebody, because they have to go over this bridge versus that road, should have a different pricing. So I think the tolls would be part of a bigger plan statewide to look at carbon pricing, congestion pricing, tolls, different ways that we're going to encourage different uses. I actually had heard about the odometer reading last night and saw it a different way, which was the odometer reading would be less in terms of the carbon pricing and more about how we pay for our roads and our road management. And the number of miles driven wouldn't be dependent on what kind of car you drove, but how much the roads cost to keep up.
Thank you. John Mahoney.
I would absolutely not support any tolls going over the Sagamore and Bourne. It's a cost of doing business. So during the Roosevelt administration in the 30s, in my opinion, the second best project the Army Corps has done in the history of Massachusetts, after the Quabbin, of course. And you have to replace them. You've gotten your money out of them. It's to the point of diminishing returns. You're going to replace them. Initially, you probably expected 50 to 60 years. You're going to get 95 out of them. You're going to replace them. Can you imagine somebody who lives on Cape, who works off Cape, and vice versa, being taxed twice a day to commute back and forth to work? I can't do that. You're going to make it more for the economy, for commerce, to get back and forth between the South Shore of Boston and the Cape, and it's just the federal government hopefully is going to pick up the entire cost of the replacement. You engineer them, you over-engineer them, and they're as safe as possible, and they're there for for society, for the state of Massachusetts to continue what we've been doing.
Thank you. Thomas Moakley.
Of course, these new bridges are going to be a federal project run by the Army Corps of Engineers, but I would oppose any tolls over the Cape Cod Canal bridges simply because people have no other alternatives. We need to be investing in public transportation in this area, which is drastically underfunded and underserving our neighbors. There's people who work and live on opposite sides of the bridges, and there's opportunity with these new projects that we can explore options for bike lanes, bus lanes, and if not putting in a rail lane on one of the new bridges, expanding the usage of the rail bridge we already have, having something like the Cape Flyer running year-round, so people have more of an option not only for commuting to the Cape in the summer, but commuting year-round if they live and work in different towns.
Thank you. Susan?
So I've been on the Bridge Fix team since the beginning. Senator Markey has been working hard on getting funding. And I just read in the Cape Cod Times today that President Trump's budget does not include the funding that was necessary for this plan. That's an earthquake of a bit of news because literally half of our district is an island. The bridges are the lifelines. It's been determined by the Army Corps of Engineers they must be replaced. And so we're in a point right now where we need strong representation to solve this problem and figure out where the funding is going to come from. I think we've got to kick the tires on every source. I think if we do consider tolls, we have to look at mitigating those tolls so that we don't squelch economic development in the district. We have to give folks a hand in their commuting costs, whether it's through tax credit or otherwise.
Thank you. Becky, we saw some recent changes to the school funding formula. Is that enough to reduce inequities in the public schools in this district?
In this district, probably not. And that's one of the reasons why I support the Fair Share Amendment. So the Fair Share Amendment is, for those who don't know, it's a proposal that has already been voted on once in the state legislature that needs to be voted on again, and then will go to the ballot box. And it is a marginal tax on incomes over $1 million. So only the income over $1 million is taxed an additional 4%. That would bring in roughly $2 billion a year to be used on education and transportation. So when we look at fixing things like the MBTA, possibly the bridges, although I do think we simply have to fight harder at the federal level to get that money and make some changes this fall to get that money. But the Fair Share Amendment would put $2 billion into our state coffers for education and transportation. And with that money, I think we have a better chance at improving some regional inequities and dealing with higher ed costs.
Thank you. John?
So you were asking specific to the district, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. The changes to the Chapter 70 funding mechanism at the state are not going to provide any relief for this district at all. That is predominantly going to go to lower income minority communities in the state of Massachusetts. You're looking at Lawrence, Lowell communities, obviously not close to the Cape of the South Shore. So we have to continue, and I said this last night at another forum, it's wonderful that the state of Massachusetts is #1, pretty much going on well over a decade with respect to where we stand in education in the United States of America. We're first out of 50 states, but when you compare it internationally, we're really not competitive. We've got to continue to proactively invest in education. I certainly agree with Becky said with respect to the Fair Share Act. I certainly support that because it's proactively investing in infrastructure and education, which is predominantly the majority of what we do.
Thank you. Thomas?
I agree with my fellow candidates and would also just add that education is the most effective equalizer among people. And I really applaud the effort of the state Senate in trying to equalize education between communities that aren't as well off as one another. But another reform that I think needs to happen is we need to stop forcing teachers to teach towards a test. Because while it's true that I think Massachusetts has the best public education system in the country, we can be doing better. And I think we can do better by trusting our local school systems and our teachers to do their jobs. And so I think we should be empowering communities to determine the sort of education that they are able to best provide their children.
Thank you. Susan?
I appreciate that there is legislation which is looking to support education, but it's not something that really is going to make a difference in the Plymouth Barnstable district. One of the problems is that there is a lack of communication directly with teachers. My daughter taught, and I know the hours and hours that teachers put in. I know the changes in the system they deal with every week. I know the challenges to the administration in dealing with town budgets. And so I think we've got to look at that piece of legislation and fight for some of those funds to be directed to the Plymouth Barnstable district. And I think we need to look at further education that supports pre-K and other programs, so that we ask the boots on the ground, the teachers that are working hard in the district, what's really going to make a difference.
Thank you. Stephen?
I read about the fair share in the newspapers, etc. And the fact is, it's tied up in the Senate. And the fact is that will it ever pass, and will the money ever come? I was a school teacher in South Boston for 5 years, taught first and second grade as well as 7th and 8th, and coached the baseball, the football, and the basketball for the CYO. And the fact is, I had a brother of mine, my older brother, graduated from Boston College, and he went on the Peace Corps, and he came back to the Peace Corps, and he says, Stephen, he says, you were thinking about going in the Peace Corps, you're already there right now. So, the town of Plymouth has built 2 beautiful schools, population has gone down in the school system as well. We're well over $100 million per year to have that school system working. I don't really see where all that money goes. And when I become senator, I'm going to go after him and say, what's going on?
Thank you. John, we start with you this time. Do you support the Safe Communities Act?
Yes. Yes, I do. So, obviously, there's some certain buzzwords have been put out with respect to this piece of legislation, you know, and I think we all know what they are, but Safe Communities Act I support. I don't want up and down the street law enforcement acting as immigration agents. There are already processes in place with respect to if they pull someone over, if there's a warrant out, their status, they have that in place. I think it's working well right now. With respect to immigration, there is a whole litany of issues that are never discussed that impact what is going on. I'm an advocate. You know, my great-grandfather came over from Ireland. My mother came down from, my mother's mother came down from Nova Scotia. We want a compassionate, legal way of individuals to get into the country. But with respect to the Safe Communities Act, I support it.
Thank you. Thomas?
Yes, I also support it. There's a lot of misinformation going around about it, and I think that's fueled largely by hate and intolerance. But what the Safe Community Act ultimately does is it makes it so law enforcement officers wouldn't be able to ask about immigration status unless it was germane to the actual investigation. That makes it so members of our community are able to report crimes, especially if it happened to them as a victim. It also makes it so that local law enforcement wouldn't be contacting the federal agency, ICE, unless a defendant was proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, simply assuring them the same sort of procedural justice that we all expect as Americans. This is not protecting criminals whatsoever. In fact, it's helping law enforcement do their jobs.
Thank you. Susan?
I absolutely support Safe Communities Act. I think that it's integral to the fabric and color of our district to be welcoming to people from all places. And I think that when you have a foundation of a tourism economy that in many businesses requires H-2B visas, and just to staff for the influx of summer folks who need services, to staff for folks who have seasonal homes, I think you really benefit from being a welcoming community. I particularly support the Falmouth Chief of Police, Ed Dunn, in his website and pamphlet that he gives to folks, and essentially explains that the department is here for the safety and welfare of everyone and enforcing the laws as required. And I think that is, you know, that would be something great throughout the district.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, I support it. You know, I grew up going to school and taking sociology classes as well as anthropology classes. And the fact is that, you know, we don't want to get into Big Brother now. You know, if someone's doing a crime, you know, prosecute them, etc. But, you know, to go in deep with the immigration, they're already here, you know. To get them out, it's a whole nother ball of wax. And the fact is that, you know, let's start, you know, leaving people alone. If they're here, welcome them, you know. And I just feel that a lot of times I read the newspapers and, you know, watch the news and say, you know, they shouldn't even bother that person. You know, he's in the land of freedom, you know. Give him his freedom. You know, we're taking away people's rights. That's another story. But I do support the act.
Thank you. Becky?
Yes, I support the Safe Communities Act. I have for some time. To me, I think back to when I was younger and I worked with battered women, and the issue was always, will people report the crime if they think that they or someone they love is going to get sent out of the country? And that has stayed with me my entire life, that there are people who are afraid of the police. There are people who are afraid of the government. And therefore, they're not going to go to the government with information about criminal activity. The Safe Communities Act not only is compassionate, but it also keeps us safer, and it allows those who are undocumented not to unfairly be the victims of crime, unable to come forward and say something about it. So I support the Safe Communities Act. I think it's a waste of our local money to pay for police to do the work of the federal government, especially when the federal government hasn't done a very good job of solving this issue.
Thank you. Thomas, we start with you this time. As we continue to battle the opioid crisis, what are your thoughts on safe injection sites?
This is something that Canada has had in operation for years now without any major incidents. I think it's time that we started prioritizing action on this area to save lives. I mean, I've lost friends to this epidemic. I bet everyone in the room has had some sort of personal connection. And there's a lot of things we can be doing, including investing in community mental health clinics, including seeking parity between mental health and physical health care. But when it comes to something like safe injection sites, it's something that needs to be from a community-oriented approach. But it's something that I think should absolutely be on the table to prioritize saving lives.
Thank you, Susan.
I think safe injection sites should be one of the tools in the toolbox against the scourge of drug addiction, opioids. It's a tragedy and heartache to families and folks that are in the grips of the changes to the brain chemistry that occurs. It's a draw on law enforcement, and it's just a complete heartache to families. I think we should embrace it in the sense of publicize, listen to folks who are concerned about their neighborhoods in terms of siting facilities. We should have hearings, we should have zoning, so that the community understands that this is a scientifically proven health benefit, and that folks in the communities will be able to understand where the sites might be.
Thank you. Stephen?
I'm 100% against this. I worked with Ray Flynn, and he had a Kids in Arms program at this Boston City Hospital when I lived in the city, and it was horrible. Fact is, they had a Kids in Arms program where the mother would give birth to the baby, and I would have to come in and hold the baby so the mother could go out and get her fix and come back. I didn't get it. If you want to go down to Mass Ave and see that opium clinic that they have going there, just think about it in your own backyard so your kids can watch it happen.
Thank you. Becky?
I think safe injection sites are evidence-based ways to save lives. I think it also takes people actually off the street doing some drugs and putting them into a safer location for that. But it also, for me personally, I remember when I was younger, I spent years in a group called Al-Anon, which is for family members of alcoholics and drug addicts. And someone talked about the fact that they had a sibling who was still using. And they said, you know, in AA and other groups, people come in and they tell their story of addiction and the story of how that affected their lives. And they said, well, you know, Billy's still working on his story. And that always gave me this sense that as long as someone's still alive, even if they're using, there's still a chance for them to get healthy, to get recovery. But once they're dead, that chance is gone. So I think safe injection sites help us keep people alive.
Thank you. John?
So this is another issue where there's just not one silver bullet solution, obviously a multifaceted issue. I helped coach a Babe Ruth team in the early 2000s in Plymouth. We won a town championship, and in November of 14, I had to go to the funeral of the best player on that team. I don't understand it. It permeates every level of our society. It is indiscriminate. I have a problem with the pharmaceuticals and the product they are allowed to put out into the market. There is no control over them. In October of 13, the Plymouth Board of Selectmen voted unanimously to incrementally add 9 bodies to the Plymouth Police Force for a street crimes unit, not to go after the addicts, but to, in theory, get this material off the streets. We work in conjunction with Jordan Hospital, community health relations, and then with respect to the safe injection sites, if this is going to help solve the problem and be a piece of the puzzle, I'm on board. They have to be properly cited, and we've got to have an open and transparent process with the community.
Thank you. Susan, we start with you this time. What do you propose to increase the amount of affordable housing in the district?
So the first thing I would encourage is the legislation that's been reviewed and suggested that we lower the town meeting a vote that is required to have zoning changes. I think that the community needs to get on board with the levels of effect of not having housing for everyone does. We have folks who work as policemen, fire people, teachers who have to live an hour away because they can't afford to live within our community. Second, I would file legislation which helps property owners who rent properties not to split up the rent between summer and winter rental, to have full-time rental, and to be able to afford to lose the high rate of summer rental by using tax credits. I think we have to have multiple means of addressing the housing crisis that we have. Folks don't want 40Bs. I think that legislation should be reviewed. It's not fair to the
Thank you.
Cape. That's another thing that I would do.
Thank you. Stephen Michael Palmer.
State budget is $44 billion. You know, Charlie Baker will come out and say, oh, we're gonna fix the affordable housing in 2030. But this year alone, he only gave us $16 million for, you know, a few towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm with the Redevelopment Authority. I'm a commissioner of the Redevelopment Authority in Plymouth, and, you know, we have a lot of homes that we have filtered through the lottery system, and we've probably helped over 100 families enjoy, you know, a home. Fact is I'm also a director of the charitable trust. I'm a trustee over there, that when someone builds a development such as Red Brook and Pine Hills, the money goes and we disperse it to people that need it for down payments, and it's a good program. I'm proud of it.
All right, thank you. Becky?
So as a member of the Pembroke Planning Board, as the chair of the planning board, we passed some changes to our zoning bylaws last year, and one was to put in a cluster zoning bylaw. That took a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of community discussion and involvement to come up with a plan that would give us some amount of affordable housing, along with over 55 housing and open space. So we were trying to work on multiple angles. But that led me to believe even more strongly that we do need this legislation that takes town meeting rules and says it needs a majority vote instead of a supermajority, 2/3 vote to pass zoning bylaw changes. We need to be able to, as a community, get serious about building affordable housing. But I also do think that as a state, we need to look at putting more funding into affordable housing, including low-income housing.
Thank you. John?
So, another issue, multifaceted, and it's to the point where it's a cliche talking about affordable housing. It's almost as people expect they can show up at a forum like this, click their heels together and say it 3 times and it's going to happen. It doesn't work that way. And obviously numerous issues we could spend hours talking about, and 45 seconds is woefully insufficient. We don't have water security in the town of Plymouth. We're faced with 3 40B projects right now approaching 900 units, and we don't have water for them. We take water for granted. That's first and foremost. Boston doesn't have to worry about it. They have the Quabbin. We don't have that. And you're on a sole source aquifer down here. And we're to the point now, in the 2016, we ran out of water in one of our wells in Plymouth, and we got lucky that that area didn't find that out. Brockton is in desalinization, $300 to $400 million. They take no water from a desalinization plant. We have to properly incentivize sensible, quote-unquote, affordable housing, rental units around infrastructure and transportation.
Thank you. Thomas?
This is a question of what kind of community do we want to be going forward? Do we want to continue our march towards being a pristine retirement community by the sea, or do we want to maintain the diverse quilt-like fabric of community that I've known and loved my whole life, with a diversity of residents, of industry, and of ideas? I think that's something worth fighting for, and I would support the bills that are currently in the legislature that allow more flexibility among municipalities to spend Community Preservation Act funds towards affordable housing, that incentivize accessory and year-round dwelling units, and also that allows people to create first-time home buyer savings accounts that would be tax deductible up to a certain amount. I mean, the median housing cost in Barnstable County is 6.4 times the median income, which is a proportion that exceeds even New York City. And it's something we need to do something about.
Thank you. Stephen, we start with you this time. What is your plan in terms of economic development?
Well, You know, you have to help the infrastructure of the town itself. I said this at a forum last night, a couple of nights ago, is the fact that Palmer Ave in the summertime is horrendous with traffic. And, you know, I know people that work for the Steamship Authority, and they say that, you know, people aren't shopping anymore. They're calling Amazon, and Amazon's loading up 24-footers and, you know, running them through Palmer Ave, you know. I know people that have wanted to come to Falmouth and shop in the stores and go to the beaches, but it's 3 hours to get here from the city, and then it's another 2 hours to get through Falmouth. Forget about going over to the Vineyard. Let's get the trucks going over to New Bedford, you know. We have to ease the traffic to help economic development.
All right, thank you, Becky.
So I agree that a lot of economic development is about infrastructure and about synergies. It's about trying to create a here, right? So a way that people can collaborate. Here in Falmouth, there's Whoosy, there's MBL, there are other organizations that throw off a lot of very talented people and talented businesses. And to try to organize those more into a center that becomes, you know, the way we think of Cambridge or another smart center. So I think that's part of it. But the bigger part of it is also infrastructure. How do people get to meetings in other places? How do people get in and out of Boston? What kind of public transportation do we have? Or are people going to spend hours on the roadways? I have a friend whose mother used to commute from Harwich to Boston every day and took a bus at like 4 o'clock in the morning to do so. That is really still the only option. There's no Cape Flyer, there's not a lot of options. So I'd like to see more transportation options, and I'd like to see 5G come to the Cape and come to these rural areas more quickly.
Thank you. John?
So Barry Bluestone is a retired Northeastern professor, had a wonderful economics professor, pretty well known regionally. He came to Plymouth a few years ago and did a 2-year review of the entire process through the Planning Board and our Economic Development Foundation with respect to our approach to economic development, and we were given a grade of an A-. So there was 2 critiques. One of them was infrastructure. You need a paid parking structure, you need roads, and you need water. Obviously, we have a serious issue with respect to water, but we're working on it, and I think the public is fully on board with what we're trying to do. Mr. Palmer alluded to the fact that the state will pass a tax, and then the tax will not go to its initial intent. We've pulled the auto excise tax out of the general fund, and we now proactively invest in roads with the auto excise tax. That is what the intent was decades ago when it was passed. And the last thing was, since 1954, the town of Plymouth has been chasing a paid parking structure, and we finally have that in the downtown area. That came on last year. Only took us 65 years to get there, but we got across the finish line.
Thank you. Thomas?
Talking to small business owners and leaders in the area like Michael Kasparian, I've learned that one of the most important issues facing businesses in our area is workforce, and workforce stability, workforce housing. And a lot of that comes back to the issue of housing. A lot of that comes back to the issue of transportation. The fact that our area is drastically underserved in terms of public transportation, and we need to reinvest in that. Other things we can do is expanding the broadband coverage to this area to attract more innovative businesses, something like Hydroid that's now in Bourne. Businesses like that can come out of the already immense brain power that we have in this area that can continue to serve really high quality jobs in this area, which is another thing that a Green New Deal would do to this area, because not just unemployment, but underemployment is a major issue in this area, and we need people with dignified, well-paying, and long-term jobs.
Thank you. Susan?
So on the Barnstable Economic Development Council, I serve with the chair of Hydroid. And one of the things that this board looks at and that I like to see are projects that not only create jobs, but they look at what kind of seeds we have right in the Plymouth Barnstable district. So being surrounded by water, one of the obvious things is the technology in terms of our clean water, having scientists who invent various means that are less expensive than sewering, wood chips, all sorts of technology that'll help with our clean water problem. We have turbines in the ocean. That's a project that needs to move forward with the Vineyard folks have to stop negotiating, move that forward. That's going to be jobs for engineers. When we look at our blue and green economy, solar development, these are all things that we've got to bring the funds from the State House to be able to move forward with.
Thank you. We're going to move on to closing statements now. You have 2 minutes for closing, and Becky Coletta, we start with you.
So thank you for hosting. Thank you to Falmouth Community Media Center for having us here today. It's great to have all of these opportunities to get our message out and let people know who we are as people and as policymakers. When I think of why I'm running and who I am, a lot of it goes back to my childhood. And parents who grew up with nothing and yet gave me great opportunities and instilled in me the sense that my job in life was not simply to make more money, but was to build a better community and a better world. But my true inspiration for being here now is my 12-year-old son. My husband and I spent years to have him, a lot of heartache. But he's our joy, and when I think of him, I can't think of the fact that he could grow up with less opportunity than I had. And I'm here because I see growing imbalance, I see growing stagnation of wages, and inequality in wealth and income. That concerns me for the future. I see middle-class families who struggle to pay for housing, education, health care, and that concerns me. I think we need a less regressive tax system that gives the middle class a break. I think we need to ask the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so that we can pay for education, transportation, and other infrastructure needs. I also am concerned when I see the amount of addiction and substance use that is continuing and seems to be growing. Over the last 4 years, we've actually lost life expectancy for diseases like addiction and cirrhosis, but also due to suicides and overdoses. We need to get serious about these diseases of despair. And finally, when my son tells me that he feels like he's growing up in a big campground in Pembroke, I need to make sure that we're not too short-sighted or too selfish to do something about our environment and our coastal region. I hope I can earn your vote so that I can get to work for you as our next state senator.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. I want to thank Mindy for moderating this event. I already knew your name. I didn't have to look at the name tag. So, and my 4 opponents here, it's been a phenomenal experience, and obviously certainly enjoyed getting outside the town of Plymouth and getting into the other 4 communities and meeting new people. And the next, I can tell you right now on the Democratic side, the bench is solid. The individuals I've met under the age of 30 have been nothing but short of spectacular. So I didn't have enough time in my opening statement with respect to 1 minute, but I work in the building trades. I'm blessed every day. I go to work. I can get ahead on 40 hours a week. I'm a member of Local 4. I work in construction. I got out early today. I'm working on the new high-rise adjacent to the Boston Garden. I'm running for this job to go up there and make a difference and continue the work of 2 state senators that I've worked in a collaborative fashion with, a Democrat and a Republican, over the course of the last 12 years, because it was always what was best for the district. Okay? We've got to go up there and compete. We've got to rein in the cost of living. We're going to continue to proactively invest in education. We have environmental issues we face. We have public health challenges that we face. I have a pretty diverse background. I'm probably wired differently than most other individuals that you meet. I have a certain level of energy that I will bring to this position. It will not be an off-Cape versus an on-Cape kind of thing. I've heard that mentioned a couple of times. That will not be the case with me, and I can tell you it won't be the case with any of the other 4 here. We're going to go out, we're going to tackle these issues on respect to all 6 communities, and we're going to work in a collaborative fashion with our colleagues across the aisle in both the House and the Senate to get things done. There's a lot of issues out there. I look forward to working for you, meeting with you, and talking to some of you. So my name is John Mahoney, and I'm asking for your consideration on Tuesday, March 3rd. Thank you.
Tom?
My family first came to Cape Cod after the Second World War, when my great-grandfather, Colonel Everett Fennell, was stationed as a group commander at Otis. And ever since then, my family has been interested in public service. I've been raised by a family and by a community that values volunteerism. My grandfather, Ray Kenny, was the principal of T-Ticket and East Falmouth schools. My grandmother, Carol Kenny, commuted up to Boston after her kids were grown to go to law school, similar to what I'm doing, commuting by bus, so I know what that's like. But and even myself, since I was old enough to get involved, I have been involved, whether it's been in the Scouts and the school committee and the Falmouth Democrats, you name it. It's always been my ambition to give back to this community that's given so much to me. I decided to run for this office because the issues that are most important to our area and that have become tragically personal to so many of us are also disproportionately affecting young people, like climate change and the opioid epidemic. And I want to do something about it. These are serious issues that require urgent action, but I'm optimistic about the future because of the innovations we're making in science and technology and engineering. It's incredible, and we're solving problems every day. My job and the job of everybody up here and everybody in public service is to make sure that government catches up. I ask for your vote on March 3rd. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Susan?
Thank you. I got into this race when Senator DiMacedo gave me an advance notice he was leaving, because we need to fight for the legislation and funding for this district that I've been working on with our delegation for over 5 years. We can't skip a beat. We need to hit the ground running on initiatives like blue and green energy projects, climate emergency responses, the bridge fix, Route 3, education, and other initiatives that I've been forwarding for the last 5 years. Our district needs a fighter for its fair share at a time when Boston is loading up on paying for delayed maintenance on the T. We need to follow the money. The Plymouth Barnstable district bears the brunt of the opioid crisis because we have world-class treatment centers, and then folks stay in the community near these resources. The district drives economic tourism for the state, and we need someone who will be relentless and tenacious in getting those dollars back to drive the engine for jobs, clean water, public safety, and transportation fixes so that the Plymouth Barnstable district can benefit from our tax dollars. As chair of the Cape Economic Development Council, I've already been working with the legislative delegation on the tools necessary. Out of the box, I was called a Terry Murray Democrat in this race. I'm a fiscally sensible Democrat, and I believe that gives me an advantage against a Republican in the general. I hope to earn your vote in the March 3rd primary.
Thank you. Stephen?
I have to mention my father, who passed away a couple of months ago, 92 years old. He was an orphan. He grew up in the house of the Angel of God in Jamaica Plain, and he told me he slept on floors and used newspapers as blankets, daily mass and communion every day of his life until he had a stroke. Fact is that he went to Boston College on a trolley car to get his degree, and then he became a probation officer for 27 years up at the West Roxbury Courthouse. And he always told his kids, I could get you a state job, but I don't want you to be a hack. So the fact is 18,000 people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that make over $100,000 a year. Now, when Deval Patrick became governor, he created another 1,000 jobs that people are getting paid $1,000, $100,000 a year. You know, I wasn't here at this forum today to talk about troublesome international affairs or the problems that begin I'm with the problems that begin at home, the comprehensible, manageable problems, like the traffic on Palmer Ave, like the guy that goes to the registry of motor vehicles and has to go jump through hoops to get a new license, okay? I'm sick of the $18 million pay raises up at the State House. When is this going to stop? Now the state police want another $16 million raises. Well, let's just tax and spend. Well, when I get elected, they're going to pay me $60,000 a year. I'm giving 6% back to the Commonwealth. I think everybody up there gets paid too much. Kind of like Charlie Baker. Oh, I'm not going to take the pay raise, but once he gets elected, he takes the pay raise. Come on, give me some truth. It's like John Lennon. I'm tired of the hypocrites. I'm tired. Give me some truth. I'm going to give you some truth. I'm going to solve some problems. Someone has to start doing the people's work. Stop taxing and spending. Let's reverse the taxes and give the Commonwealth back to the people, okay? They made a mockery out of my democracy.
Thank you. Becky Coletta, John Mahoney, Thomas Moakley, Susan Moran, and Stephen Michael Palmer are our Democratic candidates. The primary is March 3rd, as you mentioned, special election March 31st. Thank you all for being here today and sharing your thoughts with us. FCTV invited the two Republican candidates to also take part in a debate. Jesse Brown's campaign said the candidate schedule is full, so FCTV offered Jay McMahon the opportunity to give a candidate statement, and we'll take a look at that now.
Hello, I'm James McMahon, and I am running for state senate for the Plymouth and Barnstable district. I'm running because I've lived in this district all of my life. I have a business here. I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for 30 years, represented clients from all over this district. I've been in all the district courts and in the probate courts all over this district. I've been fighting for the underdog for 30 years. So I know how to be a voice for people, and I want to be your voice on Beacon Hill. Now, we have a special election here for state senate for the Plymouth and Barnstable district. It's going to be a primary on Super Tuesday, which is March 3, and be sure to ask for 2 ballots. You will find my name on both ballots. I'm also running for state committeeman for the Republican Party. So when you ask for your Republican ballots, you will see me as a state committeeman race on one ballot and for the state senate race on the other ballot, which is the special election ballot. After the primary, there will be a final special election, which is called the general election on March 31. And I'm asking your vote on both of those elections. As you know, this is a midterm, that is a midterm election, special election, because our current state senator, Vinnie DiMacedo, has resigned. I'm looking for your vote because I can be and want to be your voice on Beacon Hill. We face many issues in this district. Sometimes they're unique issues as compared to other areas of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. For instance, one of the main components of our local economy is tourism. And tourism has been greatly affected in the last couple of years by Beacon Hill. They passed an Airbnb tax, which has a telephone book size amount of regulations. And these regulations, they are economy and job killers. The Airbnb tax that was passed has greatly affected our area. And let me explain. First of all, the Airbnb tax attacks local people who have apartments or rooms that they would normally rent out to people in the summertime. Sometimes they're big enough to rent to families. Sometimes they rent them to college students. People who are here and seasonally employed and contribute greatly to our economy. Well, there used to be almost 4,000 plus Airbnbs on Cape Cod and in Plymouth, both which are vacation destination points. Well, as it would have it, the government is now regulating that, and it has reduced the number of Airbnbs in this area to only 400. It's crazy what they have done because they are destroying jobs and opportunities for regular middle-class people to make some extra money. And by regulating it, they are putting you in a system that requires all kinds of regulations that never had before. So when I get to Beacon Hill, and I'm your voice there, one of the things I'm going to do is attack that Airbnb tax, and my goal is to have it repealed completely. There's no need to ruin a good economy. We got a good economy here today because President Trump has really worked hard all over the country, not just here on Cape Cod and Plymouth County. But because we do have a full employment economy, we do not want to kill that with more taxes and higher taxes. And that's what the Airbnb tax is currently doing. So I'm going to work and be your voice to repeal that tax. Which brings me to another issue about taxation. As you know, it is a good economy. And when you have a good economy like ours with little or no unemployment, Everybody has a job. The people of Plymouth and Barnstable District, which is Cape Cod, the town of Plymouth, Pembroke, and Kingston, those people, many of them, many of our people, work in Boston. That means they have to fight Boston traffic every day. Now, that's a good thing. And the reason why it's a good thing is because everybody's working. They're trying to go to work, and they're coming back. People who work pay state withholding taxes. That's how our government is run. But there are legislators on Beacon Hill who are getting ideas, and these ideas are to tax us, and I say punish drivers, and basically it's going to be drivers of our district, from all the way from Falmouth and Woods Hole, all the way up to Pembroke, everybody driving into Boston to go to work. The way they're going to punish us is they got a TCI. It's called the Transportation Climate Initiative. There's no metrics to measure this thing, and yet this bill would double our gas tax. I'm against that completely. I don't want our people to have to be punished any more than they are with the regular normal gas tax. So I'm going to be against that. I'm against open road tolling. A lot of people don't know what that means, but it's very similar to the Mass Pike where we have automatic tolls. They want to do that now on Route 3, 495, 195, 95, 93, and 91, and another highway coming next to you. I don't want to see that on Route 3. I don't want you to have any more punishing taxes than the ones you already have to pay in your state withholding tax and your sales tax to the state. So I'm going to be a tax cutter, a tax fighter, and I am the only candidate that has signed the No New Tax Pledge. That brings me to another issue, and that's illegal immigration. We have a problem with that in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has become a magnet for that. Right now, we are paying $1.8 billion every year for illegal immigrants in Massachusetts in the form of health, education, and welfare. That's huge. And the problem we're having is that these people are jumping ahead of veterans and senior citizens for available housing and affordable housing. Now, I'm against that. I'm against the so-called Safe Communities Act. I went up to Beacon Hill just last week to testify against that bill on your behalf. And the reason why I did is because that bill would give illegal immigrants super rights over and above regular American citizens. And it would hamstring the police because the police would not be permitted to ask any suspect, any witness, any victim, any bystander their immigration status. In other words, this law would shield the likes of MS-13, the Latin Kings, and any other gangs that you can think of that are sneaking in over our borders. This country is very inviting. This country allows you to come here on a tourist visa, student visa, and a work visa. And when you do, we know who you are, we know what you're doing in this country, and we know what you're up to. But when you sneak in, we know there are ISIS sleeper cells, and I do not want to diminish public safety by giving super rights to people who are not even American citizens. This bill is not a safe community bill. It does nothing to keep communities safe. It puts us in harm's way, and it hamstrings the police. I will kill that bill when I get up there. All right, so let me sum it up with this. Most of you know who I am because you've heard of my name before. You remember me running for Attorney General. One of my biggest issues there was the opiate epidemic. I still have a passion for that because I lost someone to that. So I'm going to ask you, when you consider who you want to be as your next state senator, I want you to go to my website, www.attorney, spell it all out, attorney J-A-Y McMahon, MCMAHON.com. Check out my website, my Facebook page. It's J for State Senate, J-A-Y, the number 4 for State Senate. Check me out, and I'm asking you for your support. You can email me or direct message me. We answer every question. We are in touch with the community, and we are in touch with you. I want to be your loud and effective voice on Beacon Hill. So vote for me, Jay McMahon, on March 3 and March 31. Thank you very much.